Here we are doing a trim cylinder rebuild, or a trim piston subassembly rebuild on a Yamaha 3.3 liter V6. The reason we're doing this is it has blown out its the trim seals. It's leaking fluid, and eventually, if that's allowed to go on long enough, generally what happens is the unit will take on some air, or it'll take on some other stuff, or both, and you will lose function over time. If it's allowed to go on long enough, generally what happens is I get a phone call saying my motor is stuck up or my motor is stuck down, please help. So at Marine Tech Tools, we developed a line of spanners. We've decided we wanted to cover the entire Yamaha universe as far as their hydraulics go, and this is Marine Tech 0004 that was built specifically for the Yamaha V6 unit. It works on trim cylinder end caps as well as the tilt cylinder end caps. So you can do complete teardown with this wrench, and probably a breaker bar would help as well. Usually by the time these guys have sat in salt water for a long time, it's going to take a good bit of torque to get them broke loose. So what this is going to involve is removing our trim cylinder end caps here, pulling the trim pistons out, and we are then going to pop the rubber seals out and the O-rings off the back of the end caps and replace those things. We'll use obviously new seals, OEM stuff, new snap ring, and while we're at it, we're also going to inspect the trim pistons and make sure there's no severe pitting that is hidden from us from this viewpoint. What we can see externally here looks okay for the age of the unit and blah blah blah. I'm okay with this, but I do want to take a look at the inside of it and make sure that we're not seeing anything catastrophic that's going to immediately shred this set of seals. But that's basically the gist of it. Then once we get everything out of the unit, the piston subassemblies are out of the unit, we'll evacuate the fluid, inspect the inner walls of the trim housing, make sure we don't see any major internal damage or metal shavings sitting around down there. And if everything's fairly healthy, it's going to go back together with roughly $40 worth of new rubber seals, and that's about it. Most cases, if you have the right tools and the right know-how, this job can be done. Both cylinders can be torn down, inspected, evacuated, rebuilt, put back together and bled. Most times you can do this job in an hour or less. And it's while it can be daunting, it is one of the more do-it-yourself friendly jobs that exist on these motors. And this is a critical step. So we got our locks down. We're gonna basically drop the motor down on top of these, and these locks should be in perfect shape. They shouldn't be deformed or bent. You got to really watch your P's and Q's around these things. So now we're going to go to the manual release and loosen it up so that this unit will open up and the fluid will be able to flow around freely inside the unit and make it where we can manipulate it by hand. So and a key thing here, if this screw is locked up or seized up, it can ring off. Be careful not to ring off the tabs on there, because then you really have a simple project will turn into a major project. Okay, we're going to let it down, and we should see the motor drop down onto the service locks. The service locks come in contact with our trim brackets, transom brackets here, and then we're ready to go to work. Letting this thing go also lets go of any back pressure that's on the unit. Makes it easier to pull our end caps off. Alright, now it's opened up and ready for us to go to work on the trim cylinder end caps. Alright, there we go. That one's nice and smooth. Should come off without too many problems. So the symptoms you get when these units start to go and their seals go, you definitely can see oily sheen sitting on top of the outer surfaces of the seals themselves. And after this has been allowed to go on for long enough, you will definitely get air and other things inside your trim unit, and it will start to malfunction. Eventually, if it's allowed to go on long enough by itself, it will definitely lock up on you and get it to where you know, in one way or another, this thing's coming apart. Do not pass go. Okay, making sure this thing's bottomed out nicely. Using a lever to give me a little bit extra push on it. And there we go. That one's broken loose now. So now we've gotten through really what's generally the worst part of this job, is getting these caps off or getting them loose. Once you get them spinning, you get them spinning peacefully and you don't wind up destroying the end cap, taking it off. Generally you can reuse the end cap, which will save you a good bit of money on this job. Other critically important thing on here is while you're spinning these off, be careful with the wrench. Don't want to get into the polished surfaces on these rams. These rams are in okay shape so far. I'll take a better look at them when I've pulled them out of the unit to confirm. But if they're not severely pitted up, I'm going to put them back in use and just put new seals in these caps. Alright, now it's ready to come off by hand. As you can see, this is a messy job, but it's hydraulics. Okay, so the other thing we do when we've got the cylinder, the trim piston subassemblies out, is we evacuate the old fluid out of here. Take a look down in the cylinders and make sure we got, you know, the housing doesn't have any damage or anything like that. So we pull off our reservoir fill cap, and then that allows anything that's up in the reservoir to just drop on down, and we evacuate it out. I use a little hand powered evacuator that does really well for this purpose. I've already pulled most of the oil out, but a little bit more is seeped down, so I'm just going to get that stuff out now and then do a little visual inspection and get to the end caps and do the reseal on them. I'm mostly pulling air at this point, but I just want to make sure I have as much out as I can get out, and I'll go back with clean fluid after I reinstall, or during the reinstall. So here we have our trim cylinder end cap. When I pulled it off, I took a quick look at it. I didn't find any damage to the metal itself. The metal honestly looks really good. Didn't tear it up when we used our spanner to pull it off. So I feel very confident that we can put this thing back into action with some new seal and a new O-ring, new snap ring. So first thing I'm going to do is remove our old O-ring, just using a pick here. Snap ring, you know, obviously if it comes off without any deformation whatsoever, you can probably reuse it. I generally replace them because a lot of time they go shooting across the shop whenever they come off, and I don't feel like going after them all the time. So just work it loose as carefully as possible. And once you can get it start coming loose a little bit, like you have right there, grab it with a set of diagonal cutters, and there you go, that's off. Pulling this seal, you want to be careful not to pry on the metal surfaces. It is aluminum, it's very soft and very easy to damage. So you want to get into the rubber, and there you go. Now we're going to take a better look at what we have internally here and make sure that in fact we do have something that's viable. Metal looks pretty darn good on the inside. I'm going to spray it off with some cleaner and wipe it down. And take one last look at it after it's cleaned up. It looks good to me. You know, I have no complaints about putting this thing back into use, especially when you consider that the trim unit, the housing itself, got close to 1,000 hours on it. This cap looks really good, and I think it's going to go back into action nicely. So start out with our new O-ring. And our new seal. These guys should press in fairly peacefully. Okay, so to seat my new seal, I use this fancy schmancy socket and just press it down in there nice and gently. Make sure that it's bottomed out. Be as gentle as possible. Don't damage the metal like we went over that earlier. And then new snap ring. These guys do like to spring loose. Whenever they spring loose, they aim straight for your eyes every single time, so be careful. And there, we have our assembly ready to go back into action. Now, next thing I'm going to do is bring our trim piston over and just make sure we have nice smooth movement on it. Any burrs or any catches or anything like that, you got to drop back and take another look at things. But this has got really smooth action. I'm very confident that it's gonna do well once we get everything back together. Okay, so at this point we have reassembled our trim piston subassemblies, and they are ready to be reinstalled in the trim housing. Next thing we need to do is go ahead and refill the cylinders. So this is after we have visually inspected the cylinders, wiped them out, blown them out, and made sure that there are no big defects, no scoring or any big, problems with the housing that would cause this whole job to be a failure right off the get-go. So we are ready to go ahead and put some oil or some trim fluid in here. And I like to fill these guys up roughly to the bottom threads, because it makes bleeding the unit a lot easier. So again, we're just filling the port side cylinder up to the bottom of the threads. Then we're going to install our piston subassemblies. You will notice that fluid will travel from one cylinder to the other and it'll level out. So when you get close to the bottom of the threads, don't overfill one of them, or you're going to overfill. It'll just work into the other one, and then they'll both be overfilled. Okay, so now we're just going to go ahead and snug these guys in there. It's always a good idea. I like to put a little bit of trim fluid on the O-rings just to make sure they have a smoother transition back into the housing. We don't want them catching on anything. We just spin them on down. These edges are razor sharp. Do be careful. Once it starts to give you a bit of resistance, it's always best to go back with the wrench to snug it down the rest of the way. We're getting a little bit more resistance as that O-ring on the back side of our the end cap is working its way into the housing. Definitely don't want that to pinch. A little bit of resistance is normal. You get a lot of resistance and you start seeing black rubber poking up out of there, you got a problem, and definitely back it off and reevaluate. For now, I'm just going to snug it up like that, and I'm going to come back when I have the other assembly on, tighten it up, tighten both of them up with a wrench. Now it's time to snug them down. Make sure the tool's bottomed out, has good contact, you don't want it slipping. Okay, that was good. All right, so we're getting ready to bleed this thing. First thing I'm going to do is go ahead and tighten the manual release screw back up. So the unit is at this point. Nothing's going to be passing around. It's locked down, and all the passages are closed up. So basically, I'm just holding up the manual switch here, and I want to, once the fluid gets taken up in there and it pushes the tilt piston all the way out, it'll push it all the way up till it binds, and then I'll close it off. Okay, I believe there's a little bit of air sloshing around this unit, so I'm going to let the manual release screw back out. See if we have an airlock somewhere in there. Now tighten our screw back down. See if we have any luck. Same process, same messy process. Okay, unit hasn't bound yet, but it is pushing up on the tilt to its maximum range. I want to see if I can get it to bind before I go any further. There we go, we're bound up. Okay, so now we're just going to cap off our reservoir, put our fill cap in here. Very important note, do not over torque this. Doesn't take much torque at all, really you just need to snug it up. There is no cure for stripped out threads without having to replace the reservoir. Now I'm going to add a little bit of grease to the end of the trim rams themselves. And I'm going to let the unit down via the manual release. And now I'm going to let the unit down, let the motor down via the manual release. And that usually pushes most of the remaining air out of the cylinders. Do not let it slam into the trim cylinders. So once it starts going, you want to have your hand on this screw at all times. I like to just let it ease on down. Wow. There is no ease down for this one. There we go, nice and slow. Once it's made contact, you can go ahead and let the rest of the way out. And that sound, I don't know if you caught that on the camera, that was a whole bunch of air getting pushed up. And now we'll go ahead and tighten our screw back up. And raise up the motor using the switch on the pan. And if we bind up at the top of the range, we're good to go. We're all set.